Welcome to episode 165 of the Startup Show. Today, I am talking to the CEO and co-founder of Futurae, Sandra, and we are talking about cybersecurity. We're talking about their startup, Futurae, and their authentication solution. But we're also talking about why life is too short and you should do something you're passionate about. Make sure you stay tuned for the entire video. Welcome to episode 165 of the Startup Show. Today I'm here at the offices of Futurae and I'm talking to the CEO and co-founder Sandra. Sandra, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show today. I'm really excited to have you and talk to you about all types of stuff around cybersecurity and your startup. But as usual, as it is tradition on the Startup Show, maybe you can give a short introduction about yourself.
Hello, my name is Sandra Tobler. I'm co-founder and CEO of Futurae, and I'm passionate about all matters, privacy, security, tech companies, startups. In my spare time, I play music, and whenever time allows, have my social life with friends. That's about it.
Sounds good. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, maybe your background, like where do you come from? Maybe what inspired you to move into entrepreneurship? Because if I look at your LinkedIn, like it was not so obvious from the get-go of your career.
Yeah. I started in corporate, in a large IT company. And then via a detour into public, I worked a lot with startups. So I helped startups internationalize and also in location promotion to promote the Swiss ecosystem for innovation, to bring international tech companies to Switzerland. In that context, I work with a lot of international entrepreneurs and actually knew that it was a really bad idea to become an entrepreneur myself because I knew what it entails. But eventually I ended up as one myself. So
if you look back at all of the startups you helped, what was the main learning that you brought into your startup right now?
I think you need to be driven by a lot more than just a cool idea. You need to really immerse in the topic, and you have to love the topic so much that you want to spend years and years with the topic. I lived in the US in my last role before I incorporated my company, and there are so many opportunities that you're only aware when you're outside of the country, that all of a sudden, for me, were so obvious that gave me really this final kick to launch something myself.
Very good. Okay, so let's talk about Futurae. Maybe, first you can give a pitch for all the two people out there who have no idea what you're actually doing.
So we are working on the future of logins, to say in a very general way, which means we make sure that secure authentications to web, to mobile, to smart home devices are seamless, so you don't feel anything as a user. They're highly secure, so it's for highly regulated industries typically, and they're fun, so you can really develop new digital products where you want to have a lot of interaction with the user without being bothered by the IT security. Mm-hmm. That's what we do and what we focus on.
So the status quo right now is I go onto Facebook or anywhere my e-banking and I type in my login name. I'm typing my password and I have this from Post Finance. I have this yellow thing.
What an experience!
What an experience! What will the future look like? What are you working on?
So we have various authentication technologies. Let's say when we stay close to the status quo as it is, we can just replace this hardware token by a mobile authentication solution where you can keep your mobile phone in your pocket and securely authenticate every time you get access to your bank account. There are different alternatives, step-up, fallback options in case something is not given, if you're offline, if you're traveling and do not have enabled roaming. But that's kind of status quo replacement. But then we can even go further and say, let's eliminate these passwords because they're anyways not really an innovation that helps in the security space because people hate passwords, they use simple passwords, they reuse the same passwords for different applications, and we can make an entire passwordless experience by having a simple authentication or adding strong authentication that is banking grade.
So me as a user, I would just do what?
We always look at what product needs what type of authentication, and there are different options. We always say it's very important that you take into account a specific case, and it can be anything from having a minimal interaction of the user where the user has to scan something, enter an identifier and scan something. It can be a push token. It can be the zero touch that we do invisibly with context information that is added to once the user is entering a personal credential. Mm-hmm. Personal credential can be a mobile phone, and a contract number, an identifier.
Something like tells them who it is.
Exactly, that you need. Exactly. And then the second element comes into play through our secure token, which is on the mobile phone, typically.
So now, like when you look at like how many products do you have right now, or do you work with?
I mean, in the end, it's basically one product because we have one REST API, and you can parameterize it quite flexibly. But then this REST API is typically for large corporates that work with us. But alternatively, we have a so-called web widget, which is super fast to integrate for any smaller entity, for SMEs and companies. Just need like 4 or 5 different alternatives of authentication. You can still parameterize it, but you have a bit of less flexibility when it comes to workflows, how to migrate tokens and whatnot. There we have just an implementation that makes everything super straightforward.
I mean, that is one of the feedbacks that I got when we always ask like some of our people in the network if they have questions for you. And one of your clients came up to me and said like, yeah, Cedric, like actually what Futurae does really well, and I guess that's you behind it, is like the lean method and really making sure that like you're working together with the client. So well done for that. I'm not going to say on the record who it is, but I'm going to tell you after.
Curious.
But like, let's talk about like the business model behind it. Do you charge for the API, or what is the current business model?
I mean, we have a model that works such that it's per active user per month. So depending on how many users really use a service, you will be charged for that amount. So especially for companies that have maybe use cases that you use only a few times a year. Let's think of a customer portal that you don't use so often. So you only charge for those months that the user is actively using the service. So it's kind of not exposing you financially. And it's highly scalable. So we typically secure end user authentication, which means external interfaces to the company, not employees. Employees, there are so many technologies around. Basically, you can enforce any type of technology on a user that is an employee, unfortunately, as crappy as it is. But in the end user space, you really want to differentiate to have a good customer experience. And that said, so we have typically high volumes of end users that use the service.
I mean, like, one of the key questions that every investor asks, specifically when they're VCs, is the scalability that you just mentioned. The question, and let's say the more blunt question, is how do you get to $1 million valuation? But like, what is your plan? How to really scale this idea and to get it out for everybody?
I think on our end, we are in a B2B space. So we focus very much on B2B sales. In security, it's a very relational space. It's something that is, I would say, a lot harder to just push out via digital channels, because in the end, if you don't trust that these guys really know what they're talking about, you will not rely on a security that is so crucial to a product from someone you don't know. That said, of course, over time we can build a reputation that will facilitate a lot also distribution on digital channels. So we have a classical SaaS model. I think what differentiates us also from other providers that are typically seen in the financial scene where we are very active, they have sometimes very legacy-driven deployments where you need to install hardware before you can even run the authentication solution, not even talked about the customer journey. And we have a very scalable model that you can, like a subscription, sign up to on a monthly basis. You can get rid of it very quickly as well. But since we're positive, we're very good, this is not going to happen. And we can serve the whole world. We have already today customers across 18 countries with operations everywhere with 24/7 support. So we are super scalable from the infrastructure, from the IT stack that we built.
One of the things is like, within the cybersecurity is the data that you need for the authentication by itself. Also, like coming from one of the sources, they like told me that no sensitive user data is stored by you. How does that exactly work?
Exactly. We have a bit of a different philosophy to what you will see in the market. A lot of media is talking about biometrics. Biometrics is a cool possible way of doing authentication, but it's very sensitive where you're going to use it and how you're going to store it, how you set it up architecturally. And instead of taking into account the user itself, we take into account the context of the user, because it's totally uninteresting information for a hacker. So we take like a negative print of a user, which I can explain in a second what it exactly entails, but that is totally randomized, anonymized, so we don't know anything about the user. We never know who the user is. We are typically plugging on top of the identity, so the identity identifies you as Cedric, as who you are, and we, in authentication, we take into account the context, which can be the ambient noise environment where you're in currently. It is ultrasound that we emit that is proving the proximity of you and your device. And we take into account context information like Wi-Fi signals, Bluetooth signals, to prove that you're in a comparatively context that is known and familiar to do sensitive transactions.
And now the negative, what you said before, the negative like association with the user. Like that is
it's the negative, like taking into account you is like in the photography, it's a negative, you know,
the old-fashioned negative.
It's like exactly, it's like it's not the user. The alternative would be to take into account the user, the behavior of the user, the biometric elements of the user. But this is interesting information. So if you collect that somewhere centrally, this has a huge value for a potential hacker, which you have to be careful to expose.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
Our information is uninteresting.
Right. I mean, this will bring me like right to the next topic, which is obviously like some of the cybersecurity challenges that are. I mean, like you hear about breaches all the time, but nevertheless, I mean, like right now you're saying it's uninteresting for hackers, which I believe makes it very interesting for hackers. How can you make sure that like you stay up to date with like the cybersecurity standards?
We were born from ETH Zurich, from the system security group, and I think we come from security. It's our home turf, how we do security. And that said, we are constantly with the mindset that we need to challenge ourselves, not only internally by doing code reviews in a diligent way, but also working with white hackers from all over the industries.
Yes.
So these can be penetration testing companies. We mandate on a regular basis that try to get access to backend, frontend, mobile, SDK, everything we have. This can be customers themselves. We work with large international banks that have their own pen testers in-house. So we are basically constantly under attack from all sides, which is a healthy state to be in from mindset, because there's no such thing as absolute security. Absolutely. You always need to be one step ahead. I
mean, like when you look at, let's say, your clients that you work with currently, what is their, let's say, main motivation to work with you? Is it like the cybersecurity threat that they have?
I mean, it depends if you talk about larger companies or smaller companies. I would say the large companies appreciate that we have a lot of flexibilities in those workflows. So we have, first of all, different authentication methods. We can really help them making a very tailor-made solution for their specific needs, which is not typical. A lot of legacy vendors, they have standard solution, which dates a few years back, and that's the thing. And with us, you can parameterize really the workflows to the extent that the customer experience is really the best possible in that given context. And when it's smaller customers, we work with scale-ups, with fintechs, typically a lot. They appreciate our security know-how. So sometimes when we help them with an integration that is for their specific case, then we can also give them feedback on other areas that are correlated to the login. And I think that is something, we have a very good reputation when it comes to security know-how.
I mean, one of the things like you have achieved over the last, I guess, few years is you were part of the F10 accelerator. Also, I've heard a lot of things about that. And maybe you can give us a quick rundown of like your experience at the F10.
So we were part of the very first batch of the F10 accelerator, and it was actually an awesome experience because, first of all, the team of the F10 accelerator, they really want to have an impact in the fintech scene in Switzerland. It's not a marketing purpose, but they really go the extra mile when it comes to enabling new companies to find partners, customers, giving really straightforward feedback. The other element that was really awesome was we were an awesome group of entrepreneurs in that batch. And we have still close ties to many of the other colleagues of startups, and that was already also a big asset. You're not alone in this. You're kind of in the same stage of startup, and you have friendly startups that go through the same stuff, which is sometimes very helpful.
But how did F10 help you specifically?
So F10 helped us to do this product market fit in a very efficient way, because we had a lot of corporate people coming in and out on a daily basis that we could get hold of to ask them about things, to test features, to get really straightforward feedback. And we won customers through the F10 accelerator program.
And like, what would you say? I mean, like, there are many accelerators now in Switzerland, and only time will show which ones are really good. But like, when you would say, like, what makes the differentiation between like a good, and if you're saying your idea like the F10 was a great accelerator, what is the differentiator that can an accelerator have on or the impact it can have on the startup?
I think as a startup, you have to be very careful what programs you're going to embark on, because time is scarce, and typically also when you only do accelerator programs, it might not be seen as you have anything else to do. So for us, it was kind of the one accelerator program we did. We didn't do any other. And for us, it was a really good one, because it's really the people that are behind it. They're with the full heart. They want to have an impact on the ecosystem. They want to build a sustainable startup ecosystem in fintech, and they live it. It's not just a marketing slogan. I think it's really the people that are making the difference.
Just in yes or no, will you do it again?
Yes, we would do it.
And then, like, you work with a lot of corporates. One of them is SIX. I think that is pretty fairly communicated everywhere. What would you say? How is your experience to work with SIX as a customer?
I mean, we have really a great relationship with SIX. We have the privilege to work with some really knowledgeable people. For us, it's a very great experience to have a customer like this that gives us straightforward feedback, is very responsive, and is also brave in embarking in new things, because we still have a new way of doing authentication. And it's a brave thing to start using a technology like this from early days on. When
you look at, let's say, your relationship with the corporates, what do you think is it like that startups can bring to the table for corporates, and vice versa? What is it that corporates can help the startups?
When it comes to innovation itself, technology is one element, but the biggest impact that will come with innovation is really a cultural shift. And this can only happen if an organization is really revisiting their culture. And corporates are often struggling with this, to see this difference, and they think by adding technology it can give them an advantage comparatively, while not taking into account everyone's pace in the organization. It's a big challenge. And so I think by working with startups, this mentality of some individuals that are intrinsically motivated to do something, have an impact, can be a spark of fire to attract maybe talent in the corporate to do so and be inspiring in that context, like really from a cultural perspective. Vice versa, I think in a corporation you have clear defined processes and responsibilities, accountabilities, and typically a very objectively well-organized structure. And this professionalization is something that is definitely a healthy thing for startups to benchmark at times to get to a next level of maturity.
So what are, let's say, the next steps for you and Futurae? What are, let's say, what's in the pipeline for the next couple of months?
So we have a great amount of really awesome new customers that we're in the process of onboarding. So they're in Switzerland, but across Europe, actually. And we're excited to do this onboarding phase with them, which entails also change management, across very different heterogeneous populations. Apart from that, we're focusing very much on new partners across the world that help us building strong networks for the future, where we can be an integral part of their offering. So I would say these two elements.
Let's talk a little bit about the industry, the cybersecurity industry. I think it's very fascinating how fast this world is moving. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit, like what are, let's say, like the main topics in cybersecurity? What are the hackers are currently using to really get to all of these big corporates and breach their data systems?
I mean, the dilemma with the hackers are that they're always ahead of everything. So they get a lot more professional. So when you think of a hacker, it's not a kid with a hoodie in a basement anymore, but it's a professional corporation that runs international operations. And you also see that in the way that the attacks look like. Like there are typical attacks in Switzerland when you think of phishing or social engineering attacks, they get more and more professional. So it's very hard to train staff in organizations not to fall for those. If it's a so-called help desk agent calling an employee of a company, or if it's an email that looks very authentic, if it's a VIP phishing, or if it's a so-called support organization that sends an email, these emails, they look extremely professional. I think it's very important that every individual should be aware of any information that is given out could potentially be interesting and used for an attack or a hacker scenario. Yeah. Like even your mail signature, your out-of-office responder can give indications on when you were on holidays or when you are, or who is your stand-in, that could be used by a social engineering attack. So it's small things that you think are not important at all that could be used to make it appear as a personal, something that someone knows about you. So it gets more refined. That said, that the attacks get more and more refined and sophisticated, you need, as an IT security company, take into account that you have to re-question your model all the time. So it's a lot faster. You can't just bring out a static software and rely on that software for years. So you have to constantly have an interaction with industry leaders, with academia, on where is the journey going, how are attacks changing, and how can you keep up with different models. To give you an idea, what we have done is we focused on seamless logins as a starting point, but since there are more and more attacks also targeting users via social engineering, to ask them to enter their credentials, so they enter their login, username, password, they enter their secure token information. The most secure token information does not help. So we have developed technology where we can see if there is an anomaly when a user is, for instance, downloading a TeamViewer to avoid that potentially he's target of an attack and entering his credentials in a context that is actually not in his interest.
When you look at, let's say, look into the future, and you look at, like, say, 10 years from now, how will cybersecurity affect our lives?
I think in 10 years from now, cybersecurity is just a very integral part of everyone's mindset. If I see digital natives, how they deal with what is fake news, what is real news, they have already a lot more tuned sense for things. And so it will also be with cybersecurity, that you know how you leave traces of data and how not, and that you're a lot more privacy aware in the context of how you deal with digital devices.
Now let's talk a little bit about the ecosystem just before we go into the quick Q&A. How would you say, I mean, like I saw before you did Futurae, you were at the Singularity University, if this is correct. How did they help you start a startup, but also like if they supported you along the way now?
I think Singularity is a really cool community because it always makes you think bigger and more like holistic, and it pushes you to go beyond borders and don't accept borders as they are. Yes. And that mindset, I think, is a very valuable one when you're working in an entrepreneurial environment where you have self-confined borders all the time. And there is also a very vibrant community that I'm still in touch with, which is extremely valuable.
When we look into the local ecosystem, I mean, I saw also on your LinkedIn profile, you are a board member at Startupticker, which I guess gives you probably one of the best overviews of what's going on in the Swiss ecosystem. Yeah. Maybe you can tell us a little bit like how you perceive the ecosystem here in Switzerland, maybe even specifically here in Zurich, and like what you see are, let's say, the main drivers of the Swiss startup ecosystem.
I'm very happy with the Swiss startup ecosystem because they have done a big leap of maturity over the past years. I mean, thinking 4 or 5 years back, being an entrepreneur, you were very lonely because it was super hard to find someone in a comparable topic that has already done an exit or has already had a similar problem. And now with the maturity of this virtuous cycle, also having serial entrepreneurs being active here, this helps so much, like, to first of all know about entrepreneurship, that if in case you're interested in embarking in this down this road, that you know where to go or know individuals you could reach out to. And on the other hand side, you're not alone in this. So through having a larger amount of startups and entrepreneurs, also international people here, coming from the ETHs, but also from Fachhochschule, from art school, from any type of backgrounds, from industry. In fintech, there are a lot coming out of industry. This helps a lot of really having a maturity in an ecosystem. In addition, of course, we have more and more venture capital. I think it improved tremendously a few years ago. When you want to launch a venture, that you will, with a high chance, if you have a good business case, team, and strategy in place, that you can find a matching financing. I think what is still a bit missing is the culture in a broader society, that the understanding for entrepreneurs is here. I mean, on the one hand side, there are still some issues in taxation that are not fully satisfactory to be really a competitive startup nation. On the other hand side, it's also cultural elements. Like, it's very difficult for corporates to work with startups if they don't have a strategy in place that enables this exchange in a good way. And I still see a lot of corporates are reluctant working with startups, not only in our space, across different industries. And I think that's still a large way to go, that startups, together with academia, with corporations, can build a strong ecosystem together, because it needs all elements.
What is your role as a board member at the Startup Ticker?
I mean, I'm always happy to give the voice of a startup, to have also included elements that are maybe from a very tangible, coming from an entrepreneur. I think the Startup Ticker is a really great organization to push out news about all matters related startups, which helps a lot, giving visibility to exactly other parts of society that might not be so close to the startup matters. It's a very important voice for the startup scene, not only in Switzerland, I think across the world. There is a large amount of readers. The other elements, there are always ad hoc initiatives like the Venture Capital Report that really for the first time collected through different reliable resources, complete overview of what actually is invested in Switzerland. And it's super valuable to have a benchmark and keep comparing year over year how this progresses.
What would you like to see in the next 5 years in your ecosystem?
A lot of brave people taking on the risk of starting something new that might not have considered this before.
What has been your biggest challenge running the business of Futurae?
Time. I mean, there's not enough time all the time.
How do you foster a positive company culture?
I think it's important to give instant feedback, that negative energy is not stored somewhere. And you need to cultivate that very actively, that this is lived.
What would you call success in life for you?
I think success in life means to me being confident with what you do at any time. You're proud of what you do on a daily basis. You're happy to get up. You're excited to work on something that has an impact.
What would you say is the best tip to get an investor on board?
Trust your gut's feeling. Because you should be very diligent in the due diligence yourself, how to find investors, to have a short list what type of investors you want, not just for this round, for the long run. And you should be very careful in thinking what consequences it has taking on board an investor for later. And in the end, trust the gut's feeling when it comes to the individual stakeholders.
How did you get your first paying client?
The first paying client we got, actually, they reached out to us. We gave a radio interview in the Swiss national radio station, and they reached out to us. Yeah.
Okay, very cool.
And they're still our customer. life is too short. Don't waste it with things you're not passionate about.
Yes.
Embark on the impossible. Like, try to move mountains, try to do things that everyone else said it's crazy. Why would you do this? And have fun with it.
I think have fun is a good way to end this episode. Thank you so much, Sandra, for being on the show today.
Thanks, Cedric.
Thank you so much, everybody who stayed all the way till the end of this episode 165 of the Startup Show. Make sure to stay a few more seconds so you see who is up next Monday. And I wish you a great Monday and have a great week. And I'll see you next week. Have a great day.
Hello, my name is Markus Neff. I'm the CEO of Swisssign Group. I hope to see you next Monday. We're going to see much more about how our company is helping digitalization within Switzerland and bring Switzerland to the next level of digitalization. And as well, I give you further information why the next generation should rather go into cybersecurity and law in order to be successful. See you there and stay tuned.